Hey, how you doing? This is Steve Sims with the Art of Making Things Happen, the podcast. Imagine if you were the chairman of one of the largest recording studios and agencies in the planet, Virgin Atlantic, one of the big boys. Would you then start focusing on incarcerated people? Would you? I'm clearly asking. My guest, Jason Flom, did exactly that. Listen to the podcast where, quite simply, he just read something, watched something, and something in him moved. He got aggravated enough to take action, and he's now behind the Innocence Project and getting people that have been incarcerated wrongfully out to lead productive lives. Listen to the podcast and help it change your attitude. Hey, Jason, welcome to the show.
I'm so glad to be here. This is going to be a lot of fun. I have a good feeling about this.
Well, let's make sure your feeling's good. You're a big deal. Someone mentioned you to me and they said, hey, you got to speak to this guy. And I was like, great, fine. And you hear that a lot. And then you start taking some of the layers off. And we're going to go into the point of your T-shirt and what you're into now. But let's be blunt. You were about as high as you could get within the music industry. Lava Records, previous chairman of Atlantic Records, Virgin, Capitol Music. How did you get into music?
Well, it started by being as high as I could get as a teenager, and then and playing, instead of studying, I was playing the guitar and trying to figure out how to become a rock star. And when it became clear to me that that wasn't happening, I was very, very lucky to get like a trainee field merchandiser position at Atlantic Records when I was 18 years old. And, my dad told me, Steve, he gave my brother and I the best advice. He said, do whatever you want to do, try to be the best at it, but just make the world a better place. He said, that's the only definition of success that matters. So I knew I wasn't going to be the best guitar player. I said, forget it. I heard the first Van Halen record. I said, I'm done. I'm hanging it. I got to do something else. So I didn't quite give it up totally, but I knew, and the writing was on the wall. And then I got it. Like I said, I got extremely lucky to get a year between high school and college to work at the greatest record company in the world. And I just fell in love with the business.
So you actually went from being, basically front of stage to getting people on stage and getting them more populated and getting them exposed out into the marketplace and distribution. But you actually went, as you've just said, from probably from merchandising to being the chairman. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, it's true. I started off as an assistant trainee field merchandiser and ended up about 25 years later becoming the chairman of the company. And I honestly couldn't believe it when they offered me. You know what's so weird, Steve? Like, first of all, I was like, me? And then I was thinking, wow, I live in New York. So I was like, you mean I get to decide whether it's a snow day? And people that live in the West probably don't even know, they don't have any experience with that. But when you're a kid, a snow day is like the thing you hope for when you get the day off of school. So I was like, that's so random. But yeah, and it was an incredible journey. I learned from the greatest, some of the greatest record executives, maybe arguably the greatest, Ahmet Ertegun, the founder of Atlantic Records. I learned so much, and I was very, very lucky to discover some incredible talent.
Are you still heavily involved in the music industry?
I am not as involved as I was when I was, running companies and had, 100 and something artists and, 150 employees. Now I have a small roster, a handful of artists and a handful of employees, but we try to keep the quality control high. The latest version of Lava Records, which is my company, has featured, Lorde and Jessie J and Greta Van Fleet have been some of our big ones. So it's been a great run with Republic Records, which is, of course, usually the number one label in the business, and they're my partners.
Yeah, I remember seeing Greta Van Fleet at Elton John's because I was involved in Elton John's Oscar parties. And I remember one year Elton had them as one of the starring acts, and it was like watching. And I'm not as musical as you, so please take this with respect. But it was like watching Led Zeppelin, one of their first concerts. They had such that 70s energy of raw rock, what it stood for. It was addictive. It was intoxicating. So I wish them all the well.
Well, no, that's high praise. And it's been a joy for me to be able to stand there at these concerts, especially the early ones, and watch kids experiencing the music that I loved.
Yeah.
In a new generation, and see it through their eyes and just be like, and now it's so scarce that, to have, they're like a unicorn, And they're legit. I mean, they're really those guys. Like they're kind of, they're not social media guys. They almost never have their phones on. Most of the time, they don't know where their phones even are. So they're really, they're just in it. So this is not an act for them. This is their life.
Yeah, they did seem raw. They had that ugly attraction of just having that thing. Now, we can't put our finger on it, but when we saw Nirvana for the first time, when we saw Led Zeppelin, when we saw these kind of grooves, you went, there's something. I can't put my finger on it, but they have it. So good luck to Greta. Now, music has changed in the way that we actually get out there and the way we communicate and how we get that distribution out, from, the Beatles to the Spice Girls to today with social media. Look at Linkin Park, for argument's sake. They never had a deal. They went social and gained an entire tribe around them before they got a record deal. So how do you see the music industry changing, and is it for the good?
Well, that's a slippery one there. I mean, I miss the old days. Let's say that. Now it seems like there's a lot of algorithms and data and social media, as you said, Steve. People look, first thing you hear a piece of music now, you look to see what are the TikTok numbers, right? What are it was great when none of that mattered. You would hear a piece of music and you couldn't wait to share it with your friends, and the word of mouth would start to spread, and your friends would come over, you'd smoke a little weed, and you'd put on the record. And, now it's like music has, one of the things I don't think people talk about is it's gone from a communal experience to an individual experience. Right now, people listen on their headphones or their earbuds or whatever it is. And it's more of a solo thing. Of course, concerts are still concerts, but it used to be that we'd get together and we'd jam out to our favorite records. And, look, I don't want to sound, too nostalgic, but when I was a kid, I could go to Madison Square Garden at least once a week and see a genius, right? If it wasn't the Rolling Stones, it was Stevie Wonder. If it wasn't Led Zeppelin, it was Aerosmith. It was Pink Floyd. It was Sly and the Family Stone. I mean, that guy, what a rock star that guy was. Are you kidding me? I saw him get married on stage at Madison Square Garden. I lost my virginity at Madison Square Garden at a Yes concert. You know what I'm saying? Like but it was every week you could go there and see legitimate geniuses. Bob Dylan's kicking around, and David Bowie. And it was just nuts. It was everywhere at the Eagles and Fleetwood Mac. It was literally a musical renaissance, and not taking anything away from any of the great artists that are out today, but it's never going to be like that again. I don't believe we're ever going to see another Beatles or another Bob Dylan.
No.
Another Elvis. Now there's just too much distraction, and there's too much, it's too it's too much science and not enough pure creative genius, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a shame that they're actually trying to do riffs now that'll sit well on TikTok, rather than getting something that can get you out of your seat and have you talking about it. So,
someone told me, Steve, that the average time before somebody makes their decision on one of the DSPs of whether they're going to skip the song or listen to it is 7 seconds. Now, look, the Beatles figured this out early, right? They started their songs with the choruses, and we have a saying in the music industry: get to the chorus and don't bore us. But 7 seconds, some of the greatest songs in history have these incredible introductions, right? That's gone. You can't have that anymore. People tune out. It's like it's changed. The business has changed the art, and that's the opposite in my view of the way it's supposed to be. But sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I think it's beautiful. While we're standing on our soapboxes and clearly pointing out to the planet how old we both are. Recently we lost Meatloaf, and I absolutely adored his music because it was operatic. There was no kind of here's a chapter, here's a chorus, chapter, chorus, here we go. There was like an operatic change going through, and the best one for that was again Queen. Bohemian Rhapsody was like a bloody stage show. It was like an orchestral movement. So times are changing now. We just want to see something scantily clad and running around and saying words that we don't really understand, but are probably vulgar in some country.
Listen, we're having this conversation as my pit bull, Freddie Mercury, sleeps next to me on the right here in the studio. So, I mean, I have proper reverence. And I got to tell you something, Steve. My house that I live in, I named the house Dream On. So I have a little sign in front of my house that says Dream On. And in the back of the house, I have some steps that go down to the beach. So, of course, I named the staircase and it's Stairway to Heaven. So I literally live in between Dream On and Stairway to Heaven with Freddie Mercury. And so, that tells you everything you need to know about my worldview. And yeah, going back to what we're saying, back then you could go see Elton John at the Garden in his prime, right? You could go, it was like, we haven't even scratched the surface yet, not to mention all the incredible, I mean, it's too much. It's too much. I mean, it was literally a musical renaissance.
Now let's not get lost in glorifying the past. There is talent today. It's just harder to get out there. And we just brought up Greta Van Fleet. I urge anyone that haven't heard of this group, check them out. If you like rock, if you like the classics that we're talking about, this crew have that spin on it, and they own that sound. It's really beautiful. So there is great talent out there. It's just harder to get out there, and that's one of the points. One of the funny things was it was a mutual friend of ours that introduced me to you. I like you more now that I hear you've got pit bulls. We adopt pit bulls, absolutely love them. We got Daisy and Norman. We like to give them very non-masculine names. We're looking at another one. We're probably going to call that one Kevin. So we like doing that with our pit bulls. But you're wearing a T-shirt saying Wrongful Conviction Podcasts. And I'm in LA, Hollywood, so I know a lot of people in the music industry. You clearly do. But that wasn't the reason that we were introduced to each other. A lot of people know that I go to prison about 3 to 4 times a year with Defy, and I run educational programs with entrepreneurs and with people incarcerated that we call EITs, Entrepreneurs in Training. And we run through these programs to help them with their mindset while they're going through what they're going through to get them prepared from when they came out. And I was introduced to you because you fight the same fight, but from a different side, to get those people that have been wrongfully convicted. What aggravated you to step out of, quite simply, your ivory towers and your head of the league in the music industry to go, hey, I need to support this? What was the aggravation that created that movement?
Well, that was an article I read in the newspaper, very serendipitously, back in 1993. So I'm approaching year 30 of this work. And this article was the story of a guy named Stephen Lennon, who was serving 15 years to life for a nonviolent first offense cocaine possession charge in a maximum security prison in New York State. And I know some of your listeners are going, wait a minute, what's this guy talking about? That he must have misspoken, right? No, it was a 15 to life sentence for a nonviolent first offense cocaine possession charge in a maximum security prison in New York State. So I read this and my head about exploded, because there was the reason it was in the paper, which is that his mother had been trying to get clemency and had gotten support from some pretty prominent people, even though she was she was just a mother. She wasn't anybody who had any connections. And in spite of that, the governor had turned it down. So that's why it was in the newspaper. And I read this story, Steve. He was 32 years old. I was 32 years old. He had been in prison for 8 years. I had been sober for closing in on 8 years at that time. And it was very easy for me to see that if not for the zip code I was born in, and a number of other lucky circumstances, we could have very easily switched places. So I said, everything I thought I knew about equity and fairness and justice went right out the window. And I decided I had to do something. Well, long story short, this is where my worlds collide, right? So I only knew one criminal defense lawyer at the time, a guy named Bob Kalina, rest in peace. He represented Stone Temple Pilots and Skid Row, 2 artists I had signed, and they were getting arrested like weekly, more or less. So I had the guy on speed dial. So I called him up and I asked him to get involved. He said it was hopeless, but he agreed to take the case pro bono after speaking to the mother on the phone. And 6 months later, we ended up in a courtroom in Malone, New York. And I sat there. I had a freaking mullet and I was wearing purple Doc Martens. And I didn't know what was going on, but the arguments went back and forth. The kid is there in shackles, right? Like he's a mass murderer. And I'm sitting there holding the mother's hand. Her name was Shirley. And the judge bangs the gavel down and says the motion is granted. And Bob comes running over to me. I said, Bob, what happened? And he goes, we won. I go, get the fuck out of here. We won? He goes, we won. I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. It's the best feeling I've ever had. So I was like, at that moment, I realized I had a superpower. And this was it. It wasn't playing the guitar like Jimi Hendrix. It wasn't, hitting a baseball out of the park like I wanted to when I was a kid. this was it. So I became obsessed with this idea that I could help free people who didn't belong in prison. Now, this wasn't a guy who was innocent, but he didn't belong in prison for that period of time under any circumstance. And I learned about the work of an organization called Families Against Mandatory Minimums that I read about in Rolling Stone magazine. I joined their board right away. It was a very new organization. It's still one of the top organizations. Look it up, FAMM. It's Families Against Mandatory Minimums.org, FAMM.org. Doing incredible work to this day. Then I saw something on TV about a case that this new organization called the Innocence Project had gotten involved with. A guy had been sentenced to death, was scheduled to be executed, Steve. And these two guys, Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, the founders, had found with a microscope, they had found this DNA that proved that this guy was innocent, and they got him out. I think his name was Keaton. And anyway, I'd have to look up that case. And I saw this on TV. I was at my in-laws' house, and I was born, so I was flipping the channels, another serendipitous thing. And I said, holy shit, I didn't realize we execute innocent people in this country. But I was like, of course we do. And so I rushed down to the Innocence Project. I walked in and I said, I don't know what you guys want me to do, but I'm going to do all of that and more. And it was basically two guys in Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, the founders, in a little room with a briefcase, a phone, a microscope, and a dream. And I said, I'm going to help you knock this out of the park. So I became the first board member, and known as the founding board member, not the founder. They're the founders. And, this work has become an obsession for me. And the podcast was a logical extension of that work.
When did you start the podcast?
I started the podcast in 2016. Steve, I've been amazed, continuously amazed and inspired by the strength and the courage and the character of the people that the Innocence Project and other organizations have helped to free, that have spent 10, 20, 40 or more years in prison, sentenced to death for crimes they didn't commit. And these are people who project this incredible grace, who have this, they don't exude any bitterness. They're optimistic. They want to they just want to live every day to its fullest. So being around them it's just inspiring. And anyone who's listening who has been around some of these people knows what I'm talking about. And so I thought, if we could do a podcast where I could interview these people, the ones who need help, who are still in prison, as well as people who've already come home, and shine a light on the causes of these wrongful convictions, which are a scourge in this country, then we could help to prevent them from happening in the future by educating people who end up serving on juries, and then having them be more, aware of what's happening right in front of their eyes, and not get tricked by people who have reverse or perverse incentives. And I mean by that, police, prosecutors, experts who lie on the stand or who don't know what they're talking about, who aren't even accredited. The list goes, incentivized witnesses. There's so many causes of these wrongful convictions. What I couldn't have anticipated, though, is that we've actually helped to free about 7 people so far who have, credited the podcast with being one of the main factors, not the only one by any means, in helping, get the publicity that got them home. Vincent Simmons, the most recent one, who did 44 years and 9 months for a crime that never even happened. And he came home in February. So yeah, it's inspired politicians to make changes, to propose legislation that has been signed into law in Washington State and Indiana and Illinois. It's helped to free people. And of course, we will never know about the most amazing outcomes, which are the ones where somebody maybe in a courtroom today, in a jury room, is sitting there and going, nope, nah, I'm not falling for this shit. I've heard these stories. I know what they're up to. There's not enough evidence. It's supposed to be innocent until proven guilty in this country. Everybody knows that, but it's not. And all of the power and all of the resources are on one side. The scales of justice. You see the lady with the classic, right, with the blindfold. I wish it were true, but really it should be tilted, all the way in one direction. So if I can help to prevent these horrible outcomes, these horrible injustices, then that's exactly what I'm going to do, and I'm going to keep doing it for as long as I live.
Where do you think the problem is? Is it our thought process of the way the law is? Is it the jury selection? Because it's always made me giggle that people get selected for jury duty, and there's no cure for stupidity. So stupid people are getting jury service as well and being asked to decide on someone's life. So that's always kind of a little bit. I've always thought there should be some qualifications required to be on jury duty, and not just anyone that stood at a bus stop on a Tuesday morning. But where do you think the biggest problems we've got now?
Well, that's an interesting point you bring up. I mean, look, I think that even the smartest people can make mistakes when they're not given information to work with, right? You have a system in America where we have more people in prison than Russia and China combined, right? We have more people in jail who haven't been convicted of anything and may never be convicted of anything than everyone behind bars in India, right? A country that has about 4 times as many people as we do, 3-4 times as many people as we do. And we have, I can give you these statistics that will blow your mind. It'd be good water cooler talk, I guess, for some people. But, we lock up black people in America at 6 times the rate of South Africa during apartheid. My point being that with 2.3 million people in prison and a system that was never designed to process this many people, right? We had 300,000 40 years ago, and there's no benefit to public safety, 300,000 40 years ago. Now we lock people up at the highest rate in the world by a mile, the highest rate in the history of the world. And it is, again, no benefit to public safety. And so my point being, when you have this churn, right, there's no chance for people to get a fair trial unless you have the resources, which almost none of these people do, to hire, a top attorney. You're going to be represented by somebody who's juggling a public defender, even if they, are doing their level best, and not all of them are. They're going to be juggling 100 cases. You're going to be in jail awaiting trial, and you're not able to meet with them. They don't have time to go drive out to some jail somewhere and sit around and wait to go process it. So maybe you'll speak to them once or twice on the phone. This is why, Steve, 96, 97% of felony convictions in America are guilty pleas. Because people get to the thing and the lawyer goes, look, just plead guilty, man. I don't really know anything about your case. I really can't help you. My best advice is plead guilty, because if you don't, they're going to throw the book at you. They're offering you 2 years. You go to trial, you could get life. You could get 40 years. That's not a joke. That's not hyperbole. So people just plead guilty because it's the only logical thing to do when the state has all the resources. And let's not forget, among all the other problems, they're allowed to incentivize people to lie on the stand, right? They're not supposed to tell them to lie, but they can go to a guy, they arrest you, Steve, right? And they take it, and then they come and they get a guy who's in jail with you, and they say to him, hey, I see you're facing a robbery charge. You want us to make that go away? Okay, good. All you got to do is get on the stand and tell us that Steve told you that he did it. And then we're gonna cut you a nice deal. And a lot of people will be like, that sounds pretty good to me. I don't know who this Steve guy is. And they might say, by the way, the Steve guy, he's a really bad guy. He did the crime. All you got to do is help us out and we'll help you out. How can that be possible that you're allowed to do that? And how can it be that police can lie to you in the interrogation? That's one of the things we're working on, right? You saw the Making a Murderer, probably. Anyone who saw that
yes.
show. I wanted to jump through the screen and strangle somebody. Brendan Dassey is still in prison. I visited him in prison in Wisconsin. We did a podcast episode with him. So that, for me, the podcast is a labor of love. The idea that we can tell these stories, interview these extraordinary people. I've been down to death row in Texas 3 times. We just released an episode with a guy down there, Robert Robertson. You have to hear this. It's your head is going to explode, but you have to hear it. We have to shine a light on these things, or it's never going to change.
All right, playing devil's advocate now and openly arguing with you. I'm in Los Angeles, and they've put the misdemeanor rate up to just under $1,000. So if you do anything and the value is just under $1,000, you get a slap on the wrist, you don't get put away, you don't spend any time in jail. So LA is making a mockery of this, and they're literally running in the supermarkets, running into stores, grabbing stuff, knowing as long as it's under $1,000, A, the staff aren't going to tackle you. B, the security guard is not allowed to manhandle you. He's there for observation. He can't tackle you and do anything. And you've got these mobs that are running into these stores, grabbing sneakers, bags, and then hailing out again, knowing full well that if they do, by whatever chance soever, get caught, they'll be told, you can't do that again. So, but don't do it again, and off you go.
Well,
carry on.
No, so this is I have a couple of issues with how you put
All right.
that. I don't believe there is a crime wave. The statistics don't back it up. There are isolated incidents that become viral because everyone wants to watch that. They see it. It seemed outrageous. People get very upset. Retail theft. 99.9% of retail theft is inside jobs, right? People taking it that work in the thing, they take it off the back of the truck, they take it from here, they take it from there. Those ones nobody pays attention to. And there's a whole separate issue with that. We can talk about it later. But the fact is that other states, and no one talks about this, Texas and South Carolina, I believe, have $2,500 or $2,000 limits on these things, right? And nobody talks about that. And everything's fine. Nobody's running around stealing stuff. And ultimately, people that are going to go and rob a store have a pretty good idea that they're not going to get caught anyway, right? So, the idea that we're going to try something slightly different and not clog up the system with low-level theft, but instead try to, do something to give these people a chance at being rehabilitated, at being, turning a corner. I mean, I don't know about you, but I stole stuff when I was a kid, and nobody arrested me and nobody put me in jail. And I stopped doing it. I did it because it was something exciting and I wanted to see if I could get away with it. And, I wasn't like a master criminal by any means. I stole a packet, some candy, and maybe I stole a little ring.
We've all done that. Let's declare it. We've all been there. We've all grabbed the chocolate bar.
Right. So the problem is that the minute anybody tries something different, everybody goes crazy as soon as they see one crime, and they go, "Wow, this makes it doesn't make the newspapers that a guy is doing well after being arrested and then getting a second chance and then decides to go to school." That doesn't make the newspapers. What makes the newspapers are these robberies that everyone gets very upset about. And I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I am saying if we always do what we always did, we'll always get what we always got. And having the numbers of people in jails and prisons that we have is unsustainable. And, it's incredible. I don't know about LA, but in New York, Rikers Island, which is a jail, and right off right over the bridge from Manhattan.
Yep.
It's the most violent prison it's not even a prison, it's a jail, but it's the most violent facility in New York State. Worse than any of the maximum security prisons. It costs, you want to guess what it costs to keep somebody there for a year? And this is people who haven't been convicted of anything, but people who may have
8 to 4 seasons. Yeah. And we need to explain as well. There's a difference between a jail and a prison.
Right.
And a prison. Yeah. The prison is where you go once there's conviction and you're actually serving your sentence. The jail is usually that in between space. So it's usually and should be a temporary facility, but some people can actually spend many, many years in the jail. In a prison, they know you're going to be there for a long time, so they'll have better fitness, they'll have better ways you can rehabilitate yourself, libraries, things like that maybe you don't always have in a jail. So you need to be aware that if you're going away, the jail's not where you want to be. You either want to be out or you want to be in the prison so you can get on with your sentence. And Rikers, as you well pointed out, is not a prison. So it isn't set up. So no, I don't know how much it costs.
Well, according to the New York City Comptroller, it costs $565,000 a year to keep somebody at Rikers Island. So that means you could put them in the Four Seasons in a suite overlooking Central Park with room service. Even Freddie's angry.
Yeah, and still have some cash left over. Yeah.
And so, I think the idea that we're continuing to prioritize putting people who we don't know if they're guilty or not, right? Just because you get picked up because you may or may not have robbed a store, you're entitled to a trial. So apropos of this, there's these two little things called the Sixth Amendment and the 14th Amendment. And those two amendments to our Constitution are equal protection and due process. And my great friend, Alec Karakatsanis, who founded an incredible organization called the Civil Rights Corps, he has sued and won lawsuits all over the country, including in the Deep South, even from conservative judges, as he points out in layman's terms that you cannot have a system where two different people get arrested on the same day for the same crime, and the different people, different crimes, but the same category of crime, and one posts bail and goes home, and the other doesn't have the money and goes to jail. That is not equal protection or due process, and it's not legal. but we do it day in and day out all over this country. And I was going to just read you something real quick if I could.
Sure.
I'm just going to pull up something that Alec wrote, which I read this when I was on Joe Rogan's podcast. And I encourage people to listen to that episode if they can. Mostly listen to the Wrongful Conviction podcast because you'll hear everything you need to know. If you're interested in wrongful convictions, you'll learn so much. I mean, I learned so much listening to it. Recording it, I learned so much. So let me just read you the first paragraph of what became Alex's, or two of what became Alex's book, which is called Usual Cruelty. So he says, hold on, why is this not coming up? Let me just refresh this real quick, and I will get to it in a second.
We're going to put all of the links in the show notes below of how people can listen to the podcast and follow everything. So
yeah, fantastic.
We're going to have it there for them.
Okay, so here we go. I found it. On January 26, 2014, Charnel Mitchell was sitting on her couch with her 1-year-old daughter on her lap and her 4-year-old son to her side. Armed government agents entered her home, put her in metal restraints, took her from her children, and brought her to the Montgomery City Jail. Jail staff told Charnel that she owed the city money for old traffic tickets. The city had privatized the collection of her debts to a for-profit probation company, which had sought a warrant for her arrest. I happened to be sitting in the courtroom on the morning that Charnel was brought to court, along with dozens of other people who had been jailed because they owed the city money. The judge demanded that Charnel pay or stay in jail. If she could not pay, she would be kept in a cage until she, quote, sat out her debts at $50 per day or at $75 per day if she agreed to clean the courthouse bathrooms and the feces, blood, and mucus from the jail walls. An hour later, in a windowless cell, Charnel told me that a jail guard had given her a pencil, and she showed me the crumpled court document on the back of which she had calculated how many more weeks of forced labor separated her from her children. That day, she became my first client as a civil rights lawyer. And then it's followed by a quote from Angela Davis, who said, very simply, prisons do not disappear social problems, they disappear human beings. And, you know, inside of this is the tragedy that so many people are in jails and prisons in America for things like that, for driving on a suspended license, for being homeless, right? I mean, that's the number 1 and 2 reasons for interactions with the police in America are, traffic violations, which I would argue that police should not be handling those things in the first place. Better uses for their time, and being homeless. And I don't really understand how we allowed it to get to this place, and we keep pulling money from the things that actually work: education, social services, different programs. You're involved in one of them on the other side, right? But the fact is, we know what works. I think many people who may be a little more conservative might be surprised to learn that the Quattrone Center at the University of Pennsylvania did a study where they studied people who went to jail and people who didn't pre-trial. Exactly what you're talking about. So 2 guys to commit a robbery of a store, whatever, like a nonviolent robbery. I mean, it's still a robbery, but no weapons, whatever. And different crimes they studied, and one guy bailed out, and the other guy went to jail because they didn't have the resources. And what they found was that the people who didn't go to jail, upon their release, comparing that with the release of the people who did go to jail, were 30+% less likely to commit a new felony or a new crime. I don't remember exactly what category of crime it was in the ensuing year. So, and that makes sense too, because think about it. If you go and arrest a bunch of kids because you think they're the ones that may have broken into a store, some of them did, some of them didn't, maybe none of them did, maybe all of them did, but whatever it is, or anybody that you pick up for a, nonviolent crime or a nuisance crime or even a nonviolent theft. Now, those people go to jail, and whatever problems they had that caused them to be doing what they're doing in the first place have now gotten a lot worse. Even if you're in there for a week, and even if you're not subjected to rape, torture, beatings, illness that you could get there because of the disgusting conditions of most of these jails, even if you're lucky enough to avoid those fates, by the time you come out, a week, a month, a year, 3 years. I'm working on a case in Kentucky now where a guy's been in for almost 10 years without a trial. So you come out and your life is now a lot worse than it was before. You've lost your job, almost definitely, right? You may have lost your housing. You probably could have lost custody of your kids if you had them in the first place. Your stuff is really messed up now. And as you know, other than the organization you work with and a number of other great organizations, we build walls instead of ramps, right? These people, 95% of people in jail and prison are coming home one day, right? We need to create opportunities for them. And one more study I'm going to point out, which was recent, the University of Chicago Crime Lab found that one of the most respected research organizations in the country did a different study where they gave job training to people before they were released from prison, and they continued when they got out. They paid them $15 an hour to take job training, and then they studied. And they found in the next year that those people were 90% less likely to shoot anyone or be shot than the people who didn't participate in the job training. So if you pay people $15 an hour so they can actually eat a little bit, you can't eat much on $15 an hour, but you could eat, and they're able to take job training, these people don't want to go back to crime. Some of them do, but most of them don't. And this proves it. These two studies prove it. So if people are looking for a solution that is going to be a magic, wipe out all crime right away and everything's going to be a utopian society and no one's ever going to get robbed or hurt or this or that, I don't have that for you. Okay. That's not going to happen. But I can say with absolute certainty that if we keep doing it the way we're doing it, all we're going to have is more usual cruelty, and we're going to have the same outcomes, and we're going to have people who become career criminals because their options are limited by their circumstance. So, I have faith that people can change, that they want to change. I think there's a small number of people who are not reformable. And mostly those people are hurt people who are hurting people who went through incredible trauma as children. I'm not excusing their behavior if it's violent behavior, but, it's a lot more nuanced than people think. And I think people just read these headlines and they react. And if they take a deep breath and actually learn more about the issues, then we can hopefully get to a better place where we treat our fellow citizens like human beings instead of like things to be processed by a machine that churns 11 million people in and out of prison. 11 million people go through jails and prisons in America each year. What is that? What in the world is that? But if we keep doing it the way we keep doing it, then we're going to keep doing it, and we sell all those numbers, and all the money and all the resources are going to keep going to that. And New York City just took $200 million away from education and put more of it into police and prisons, and it's like, okay, but I can tell you how it's going to work out.
Still the same problem. How can people find out about you, follow you, get involved in the Innocence Project, find out about your podcast? Tell us how we can follow you and support.
Well, if people aren't tired of hearing me rant and rave by now. But yes, if you'd like to, I would love to have people follow me on Instagram and TikTok. It's It's Jason Flom. That's ITSJSONFLOM. And Instagram is really the place where I put out the most of the content that I think people will be interested to see. And of course, the podcast is more important. The podcast is Wrongful Conviction. You can get it anywhere you listen to your podcast. Don't listen to it because of me. Listen to it because, the life you save may be the life of somebody you love. And, the stories the people are so extraordinary. And then the last thing, if I could just take another minute, I'm going to implore people two things. One is, if you do get asked to be on a jury, I know it's a pain in the ass, but go and serve and listen to the podcast and be aware. And like I said, the life you save could be somebody you love, could even happen to you. Seems crazy, but it's true. And lastly, if you or anyone share this information, please. I talk about the podcast all the time. If you get picked up and brought in for questioning, I don't care what the circumstance is. You did something, you didn't do something. They tell you you're just a witness. Steve, we think you might have seen something, that there was this terrible crime. The only thing you should say, first of all, don't waive your Miranda rights. 85% of people waive their Miranda rights. Do not do that, okay? Especially innocent people do it. They think, well, I'll just go in and tell the truth and I'll go home. Do not do that. Say your name. I'm Steve Sims, and I want a lawyer. And then shut the fuck up, because anything you say not can be held against you. It will. And they can talk you into a corner, and then you'll be, I don't want to have you on my show in years to come. Okay. I want to keep everybody safe. So the best thing you can do is don't say anything until you get a lawyer. And that's, I'll leave you with that. Wrongful Conviction is the podcast. I'm Jason Flom. Steve, I love following you, by the way. Your career has been unbelievable. You're an unbelievable guy. It's awesome. So, yeah, I'm really psyched to be on the podcast. I'm looking forward to meeting you. When I come to LA or you come to New York, let's get together.
Oh, that's going to happen, Jason. Well, look, there's no way in the world that we're not going to collide and do more together. So I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing and what you're standing up for. And I'm appreciating the fact that you're putting the message out there to get other people to think. And that's what we need people to do. So, Jason, thank you very, very much for being on the show.
Thank you, Steve. Have a great night.
Cheers. Hey, I hope you liked that episode of the Art of Making Things Happen podcast. And remember, these are done for you. If you like them, subscribe, share them around. But if you don't like them, send me an email to ask@stevedsims.com and you can tell me what I need to do to make this the most dynamic podcast you listen to. Anyway, make sure whatever you learned from the last podcast, you actually do something with. Without action, it's just a bunch of people blowing air. Have a good time. Until next time. Bye.